Hey guys, if you enjoy the content I've been putting up, make sure you give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button so you always know when a new video pops up. Now that we got that part out of the way, let's get into the video. Final Fantasy XIV is a massive game with thousands of hours of content. What I'm going to do here is break down some of the major plot points for those of you who want to know more about Eorzea, but may not have time to experience it all firsthand. This time we're covering the story of Eden's Verse. These events pick up a little while after the events of Eden's Gate, so if you haven't seen that, click the link in the description, watch it, then come back here so you won't be lost. Yalford, one of the members of Reen's team on the Eden project, has been looking for you because the girl you brought back from the empty finally woke up. Reen and Urianger show up, already having heard the news from Thancred, and both are eager to find out more about the mysterious girl who tried to kill you. Her name's Gaia, and she claimed to be from Yulmore, but that's all she seems to remember. So Thancred took her home to see if anyone there recognizes her. They should have been back already though, so something must have happened. Well, something did, but it wasn't what you'd think. Thancred wasn't delayed by a Sin Eater attack or anything else that makes sense. Nope. He's just been struggling to carry all of Gaia's luggage from home. Her neighbors barely knew her, and other than seeing her house, they didn't learn anything on the trip. She didn't even remember much about her own life in the city. However, she thinks she'll get her memory back if she hangs around you guys, so she invited herself along and made Thancred carry all of her stuff. I personally would have tossed her luggage into the land of the Pixies because of how rude the girl is and let her spend the next decade trapped in one of their gangs, but Thancred's a bit nicer than I am. Since the conversation is dragging on, you all find a spot to sit down at Gaia's rude request, and Reen starts questioning her about her amnesia. The fact that her memory loss is so random makes it seem suspicious, but Thancred trusts her for some reason. Since he wants her to trust you all as well, he let her know about what you were doing in the empty with Eden. However, he still wants you to be on guard just in case you need to introduce her to your weapons. Gaia doesn't remember the fight, but she does recognize your face. Still, she feels like all of this was destined to happen based off of what the voice inside of her head, something she calls the fairy, told her. That's not crazy at all. Nope. It's perfectly normal to name your imaginary friends. She says it even lets her use its powers, and that's where her magic comes from. Considering how this power let her summon Void Scent from the 13th Shard, I'm getting serious Arya vibes from the Red Mage story, but on a far grander scale. I say that because summoning Void Scent on the Source, the main world where you come from, is difficult. It is far more difficult to do it on the First. Urianger tries to explain this to Gaia in his usual way, and she has no idea what his unique speech patterns means, and trying to figure them out is giving her a headache. Reen understands the whole having a voice inside of her head since she lived with Minfilia in her mind for most of her life. She thinks Gaia may be dealing with something similar, and Urianger agrees, telling her his theory about Gaia being the Oracle of Darkness. Thancred thinks she shows some symptoms of Ascian possession, something he has personal experience with, but the difference between what Thancred experienced and what Gaia is going through is the fact that she never lost control of her body, and she still has some memories even after hearing the voices, so it has to be something else, because if an Ascian had taken her body, she would have no control at all. So it's probably something closer to the way that Reen was partially possessed by Minfilia. Urianger even thinks that Gaia's goth appearance may come from the possession, the same way Reen used to look more like Minfilia. Gaia shatters that theory because not only was she born with her dark hair, her parents both had the same, or she thinks, but she hasn't seen them in a long time. They had been taken for ascension by Valkyrie, which means they were turned into Sin Eaters. Changing the subject, she wants to know how Reen ended up going from being locked up in Yulmore to hanging out with the Warrior of Darkness. It is a story that Reen is very eager to tell. Bits of it Gaia remembers because she was in Yulmore when Valkyrie made the people attack you, although she was unaffected by his control, something Thancred attributes to the fairy that Gaia spoke of. The creature may be the reason why Gaia appeared and attacked you when Eden lifted off. Since she doubts she'll learn more from talking to you, Gaia hops up and decides to head back to Eden. Since the fairy wanted it, going there may let her learn what's been living in her head for all of those years. So she leaves, forcing you to track her down. It's not hard to follow the footprints of someone wearing heels through the desert, and you spot her getting attacked by a monster. She casts a wicked-looking spell at it, and makes it blow up from the inside. Ever since she was little, the fairy had whispered to her, telling her what to do and letting her use its powers. But even now, she still doesn't understand it, and sometimes things happen without her doing it, like weird armor and weapons appearing or portals opening to let monsters out. The power feels more like someone is channeling it through her and not being used by her at all. But she's never really tried to control it either, since she doesn't make a habit of fighting monsters. But she better get used to it if she plans on traveling with you all to Eden, although Thancred doesn't think it's a good idea, especially if it makes her lose control and decide to attack you. Urianger agrees with him that they should keep Gaia isolated and under guard while you continue your work. It's not like your mission to use Eden to restore the first is easy anyway, and adding another potential problem to the equation isn't all that smart. Ring counters, claiming that it wasn't that long ago that she was isolated and held against her will for what people claimed was the greater good, and if that's what Thancred thinks they should do, then he's no better than Valtteri. That is an insult on so many levels for those of you who haven't seen the former leader of Yulmore in the main story. Just trust me when I tell you that there's no worse insult than comparing someone to that guy. Gaia needs help, and Reen wants to help her just like you all did for her, even if it does put the mission at risk. Knowing that she feels so strongly about this, both Thancred and Urianger agree to taking Gaia to Eden and helping deal with any trouble Reen's decision causes later. Gaia, somehow thinking she's in charge, tells you to hurry up with the emotional stuff and get a move on, or she'll leave you behind, even though she needs your vehicle to get there. Back at Eden, Gaia doesn't attack you, so that's a good sign at least, but it could be because she's so lost in thought. Reen tries to talk to her, but her positive attitude doesn't do anything but make Gaia angry. Every second that passes makes her feel like the voice in her head is taking over her, and she doesn't even know if Gaia is her real name. When Thancred had asked her, she couldn't remember, but the fairy told her that it was Gaia. She couldn't ask anyone in Yulmore because everyone who knew her was either turned into a Sin Eater or disappeared. Reen tries to relate since she never knew her own real name either. She was either called the Oracle of Light or Menphilia until Thancred named her Reen, but Gaia changes the subject. The fairy hasn't reacted to her being near Eden, so maybe it would do something if you fly the thing around a bit. You still got elements to reawaken, so you all make your way back into the giant Sin Eater. Even though you have made some changes to the elements with the Sin Eater's power, the changes haven't spread. Activating the right third element might be able to jumpstart the others. Lightning is that element, which means you're going to go up against Ramuh. Reen's excited to see him and his legendary beard since Thancred's told her all about it. Now, if you remember how this works, you have to fly to an area ripe with the element that you want to awaken. Urianger suggests the Gandalf Thunder Plains, since before the flood they had been covered in a never-ending lightning storm, and the lightning ether is still very strong there. Now, I'm sure you remember that your memories were used to mold the ether into a primal, and just like before, you royally mess up summoning Ramuh, giving him a nice shave and a ripped half Ixion body. So basically he looks absolutely nothing like you remember, solidifying my claims that the Warrior of Light has brain damage from all the times he's been knocked around. After overcoming the Lord of Lightning, you all head back to your camp. Although there are no visible changes to the area, Thancred can feel changes in the air. It feels like a storm is on the horizon. Gaia's not impressed by Eden's abilities, and apparently neither is her fairy because it still hasn't showed up. Making the air human isn't really a big step toward restoring the world to how it was before the flood, and Urianger believes that a more active element is needed to jumpstart the process of making it rain. There is a problem, however. You need wind ether to form the clouds, and fire ether to evaporate the water. Individually, neither will be much use, but being balanced alongside the elements you've already restored should cause it to rain. So Gaia proposes that you draw out both elements together. Now I want you to let that sink in for a moment. Drawing out an element summons a primal, and the only way to restore the ether to the land is to defeat the primal. Doing this will cause you to have to fight two primals at once. And not just any two, the gods of fire and wind. Your friends, who you've gone out of your way to save countless times, who you've laughed and cried with, eaten dinner with, and never done anything but help them, wants you to fight both Garuda and Ifrit at the same time. Reen does seem a bit preoccupied though, and piloting Eden while she's worrying about other things won't make what you're trying to do any easier. Knowing this, the girl finally tells you what's on her mind. Gaia is one of the only people her own age that she knows, and she wants to be a friend, but the girl's not the most friendly of people. She doesn't really know how to even go about making friends, and with everything going on, it's probably the dumbest thing for her to be thinking about, but it's still bothering her. Honestly, despite all of the battles that she's fought beside you in, it's important to remember that Reen is still only 16, and not even a normal 16-year-old. She's been kept secluded from the rest of the world until only recently, and while Alizé and Alphinaud are only a little older than her, the trials that they've been through don't make them count as normal teens either. Seeing Reen trying to have a normal conversation about shopping and such is kind of refreshing, although seeing the hurt look on her face when Guile tells her that she's only sticking around to see what happens with Eden, not because they're friends, is a little heartbreaking. At least Reen tried, so now it's time for you to do the almost impossible. Urianger guides you to a place called the Ashfall, where the weather was once scorching hot during the day and extremely windy at night. The perfect place for you to do battle with two primals. Facing them both is definitely a unique challenge, especially when they perform a Dragon Ball Z style fusion complete with a new name that I'm not even going to try to pronounce. Despite the fact that you shouldn't have been able to, you do bring down the pair, and when you step outside, it's actually raining. There's only one last element left: ice. Despite seeing physical changes this time, Gaia seems even more depressed. Despite her being near Eden, nothing's changed for her. She still has no memories, and once this little distraction is over, she'll still have nothing. She shouts at Eden to give her back her memories, causing the voice inside of her to finally speak. It tells her to extinguish the light and awaken her true power, because it's time for her to reclaim her memories and fulfill her destiny. The voice fades without giving her any real answers, and since there's nothing you can really do about it for now, you all head back into Eden's core to plan your next move, because while bringing the rain back was great, standing in it, not so much. With ice being the final element, the plan for summoning it has to be made, but first Gaia wants to know if fixing this final element would change the world back to how it was before the flood. It will, in a few decades. Can't fix all of the damage that was done overnight. The empty has been, empty for 100 years, so it may take that long to return it to what it was. Gaia is shocked that you're working so hard to fix a world that you may not even live long enough to see, while all she's been worrying about is herself. She's always listened to the voice in her head, scared of what would happen if she disobeyed it, but she doesn't want to do that anymore. Because if Reen's destined to fix the world, and Gaia's supposed to be her opposite, then that means she's there to destroy it. She starts to think that was the reason that everyone abandoned her, and the reason why, eventually, all of you will too. It's why she's been keeping you all at arm's length, evading Reen's attempts at friendship, because in the end she knows she's a monster meant to bring misery and death to everyone. An intense pain overcomes her for a moment, and she steps outside for some air. She says she's fine, but Reen's worried. Thancred sends you to check on her, just in case there's a repeat of what happened before and she accidentally summons a horde of void scent. Outside, the darkness that filled Gaia bursts out of her, forming a strange crystal, and a swarm of sin eaters appear, drawn by the power of the creature that Gaia had called her fairy. It attacks her as you arrive, but she fends it off, and you bring her back inside as the fairy sends its sin eater horde at you. Urianger goes to tend the now unconscious Gaia while you do what you do best and face off against the fairy and its sin eaters. You best the creature, but Gaia still doesn't wake up. Her mind floats alone in a dark void without even the voice of the fairy to keep her company. She shouts, but no one seems to be able to hear her. Even worse, her memories still haven't come back. Reluctantly, she accepts her fate, hoping that death will at least give her peace, but Reen's voice cuts through the darkness and wakes her up. Although she won't admit it, she was surprisingly happy to hear the girl. She does apologize for interrupting what you were doing with her little issue, and while she's feeling better, something about the incident is bothering her. That was the first time the fairy's words had put memories into her mind, memories of stuff that she doesn't understand, memories of things that someone else saw. Urianger believes that since you brought back darkness to the first, that may have woken up a bit of Zodiark's power on this shard. Like Minfilia could hear the voice of Hydaelyn because of her status as the Oracle of Light, Gaia may be hearing the voice of a bit of Zodiark that still exists here. But being touched by his power doesn't mean Gaia has to obey it, so Reen's not worried. There will be plenty of time to ponder her situation after the final element is restored. The time has come to deal with Shiva. Shiva wasn't summoned the same as the other primals. Isel, a woman who fought both against and alongside you, used the Echo to transform herself into Shiva. The fact that she could control it herself intrigues Reen as you all head to the Great Glacier in the northernmost part of the Empty. When you arrive, Reen decides that she wants to be the vessel for Shiva. Since ice is the element most aligned with light, using her abilities combined with Eden's should let her do it. While Urianger doesn't agree with the idea, it definitely has its benefits. The cell was a powerful ally who could become a primal at will. Reen learning to do it would be very useful, except for a very important fact that Thancred seems to be the only one to remember. When primals get summoned, you stick pointy things in them. And Thancred has no intention of watching you and Reen try to kill each other. Not to mention the ether only returns to the land when the primal, dies. So if Reen becomes a primal, you would have to kill her to restore the ether to the first. Of course, there may be other ways, but to Thancred, they don't seem worth the risk. Reen believes she can control it and disperse the ether safely, but if it takes control of her, then you won't be able to hold back in the battle that'll follow, or she'll kill you. Still, she wants to try, because Eden seems to have infinite power, and while it's listening to her for now, what happens when it stops? It could undo everything that you've done, but if she can train it to absorb and disperse ether safely, then she can let it restore the rest of the empty on its own without having to worry about it starting to feed on the ether like other Sin Eaters, and end up destroying the world. Reluctantly, Thancred agrees, and Reen transforms into Shiva.
I call upon the power of Shiva. You've got to stop her!
The ether immediately overwhelms her, who really didn't see that coming, and one of the most epic battles ever begins. As you fight, light ether explodes out of Reen, freezing you solid. Luckily, Gaia jumps in and summons Mjolnir to break you free of the ice prison, and she uses her power to contain the flood of ice that started to burst out of Reen while you knocked the girl out. On a side note, this was one of my favorite parts of this story because of one thing. You lost. The Warrior of Light was done in by Ice Empress Reen, and the only reason you survived is because somebody else jumped into the fight to help you. That's probably the only reason that I like the character of Xenos. He's a stereotypical villain where he's just bad because. But in a fight, he's somebody who can overpower the Warrior of Light. And after all of the things that you've been seen doing up through Stormblood, it's refreshing to see you finally fight somebody who you can't just dominate. In any case, once Reen wakes up, the power of Shiva has left her, all aside from a small piece of ice that Gaia thinks will make a nice necklace. Thancred looks on as the two girls finally laugh and talk as friends. Together you all step outside to see what your efforts have accomplished, only to see that grass has begun to grow all around your camp. With your task done for now, and a new friend made, you all leave the empty for a much needed rest, and to tell the rest of your team what you've accomplished so far. This concludes the story of Eden's Verse. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, and make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on the next video.